You've probably heard the expression that necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we can apply that to birding. For decades, birders have been using their current technologies to find ways of communicating about rare birds in what we generally call rare bird alerts. So the necessity has been getting that information about when and where a bird is out as quickly as possible. The problem is that as we get better and faster at spreading this information, some of the methods are making it harder to communicate effectively, and the whole system might be getting worse. I'm Doug Hitchcox. My goal is to get the most people to see the most birds, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the various ways birders have to communicate about rare birds. I'll cover the past, present, and discuss some of the growing problems, and talk about some of my hopes for the future of rare bird alerts. I want to start with a quick history lesson because I think it's important to talk about some of the past ways we've communicated about rare birds that got us to the modern systems. But I will acknowledge that this is coming from a millennial's perspective, so I can't share any personal experiences from those pre-internet days. But there are two stories I know of that I think will give us a good snapshot of some of the OG rare bird alerts, at least going back to the 1970s. The first one is from the book Kingbird Highway by Ken Kaufman. This is a great read, and while the world and birding have changed a lot since the 70s, it is fun to see how much has remained the same. I'll quickly share that this was hugely influential as I was getting into birding, and my bias may show a little since I was a male high schooler reading about Kaufman as a teenage recent high school dropout who undertakes a big year, attempting to see as many species of birds as he can find in the former ABA area in one calendar year. Big year attempts require seeing all of the birds you'd expect to find in your target area, but records are broken with the number of rarities that are found. One of my favorite rarity tales from Kingbird Highway is pretty classic of the time, in this case 1973, when word of mouth while out birding was the best way for a hitchhiking teenager to learn about something unusual. As the story goes, Ken was visiting Ted Parker, stopping by his dorm at the University of Arizona, who tells him about a spotted redshank being seen in New Jersey. So Ken has to hitchhike 2,500 miles, which takes 6 days, and when he arrives on the scene, sees no other birders. He does discover at the visitor center a long account written by Harold Axtell, an expert field observer about the bird actually being misidentified. Axtell realized that it was actually an oiled yellowlegs, causing the plumage to look dark and noting the legs only looked red under certain lighting. Ken spent a week of his big year thumbing his way across the country for a bird that wasn't even there. Now, not to jump ahead, but this seems almost unbelievable in contrast to modern birding in the 2020s, when we get minute-by-minute updates and rare birds are photographed, now digitally, and thoroughly vetted by experts online, often within the first hour or two of even being discovered. I've definitely heard of birders buying next-day flights to chase rarities and having it turn out to be a one-day wonder, but still, those people aren't just going days without updates and hoping that it's still there. The other story that I love, and the second one that I want to share, is from 1975, with another rare bird that was found and spurred an event that's called the Birding Event of the Century. This was the first lower 48 record of Ross's gull, which at the time was still largely unknown even in the high Arctic where the bird typically dwells. Much like my prior example with Kaufman's big year, phone trees were the best way to spread news of rare birds. Most states had at least someone or somewhere that you could call if you found a rare bird. Then they would call a handful of people, and they would call their friends, and so on. I've heard a few tales of birders from this era that missed their phone calls and might not learn about that bird until weeks after it had left. Anyways, the Ross's gull was discovered in Newburyport, Massachusetts by a few local birders, including one of my early mentors, Paul Miliotis. I wish he was still around to tell his side of the story firsthand, but for the sake of this video and relevance to rare bird alerts, here are some interesting quotes from a New York Times article. 3 telephone calls bearing news of the Ross's gull were made in the space of 10 minutes last night to New York home of Roger Tory Peterson, who is to feathers what Julia Child is to egg whites. At 3:45 this morning, Mr. Peterson, the author and editor of the series of small field guides that are the Nature Lover's Bible, was on his way. A bird of this rarity gets a lot of people talking, said Davis Finch, another well-known birder, who left New York at 2 o'clock this morning after receiving similar telephone calls. The article goes on, and I'll link below if you want to read the whole story, but there's another good quote that one man kept talking about a birdwatcher in Missouri whom he had to call to tell about the gull, and Mr. Finch said that he thought his telephone bill went up $20 that night. For those of you too young to know this, back in the day to make a phone call on landlines, you'd pay a monthly rate for local calls, but long distance calls you'd pay by the minute. A cross-country call could be over $1 per minute, which in 2024 dollars is around $7.80 per minute. So you can see why Davis racking up the equivalent of a $150 bill in one night was newsworthy. So one outcome of these phone trees were to have a rare bird alert hotline in each state that you could call to hear a recording of what rare birds were being reported in the state at that time. I'll talk about the difficulty of knowing where to get rare bird updates when we talk about our modern systems, but I think it's pretty cool and convenient that the American Birding Association used to include a little removable insert in Birding magazine with the hotlines for each state. Here in Maine, it was Maine Audubon that up until the early 2000s was still recording these on a weekly basis. One of my first responsibilities as a volunteer in 2011 was writing up the weekly report, a task that has now essentially been replaced by eBird's automatically generated regional rare bird alerts. So this is another case where, at least from a 2024 perspective, where we have immediate access to information, I can hardly believe only getting a weekly update on a rare bird. Imagine a rare bird being found the day after that recording was taken, and then you wait a whole week after it was found to even hear about it in the next recording. The next advancement in reporting technologies adopted by birders came with the internet revolution in the form of listservs. This is software that allows someone to send an email to a list, which then transparently sends it on to addresses of the subscribers to that list. The transparency part is cool because you can see who it is coming from and even reply directly to them if you have questions or wanted to congratulate them. Most states have or had at least one birding listserv. Then larger states like California had separate lists for specific counties. And this is a good time to point out that these aren't necessarily just for reporting rare birds. People often report common species seen on a morning outing, or sometimes just report birds in the news. I do wish that there was a more standardized format or generally recognized way to report a sighting to listservs. I always try to put the species name, location, and date in the subject line, all caps if it was a mega rarity, so that even at a glance you would know how important it was. A quick story about this being useful comes from one of the craziest rare bird discoveries in Maine, a vermilion flycatcher found on Hog Island, but first spotted by someone over 3,000 miles away. There's a well-known osprey camera on Hog Island off Mid-Coast, Maine, that you can watch on explore.org. The person who operates the camera was in the UK and noticed a small red bird perched up on the osprey nest. They knew it was something unusual and emailed the other camera operators in Germany and Texas before it was recognized as a vermilion flycatcher. They quickly emailed a Mainer associated with Hog Island, who got the word out on the listserv. The only problem was that in the subject line, they only said, quote, "rare bird visits Hog Island," and a lot of birders didn't even open the email to see what it was. Don't get me wrong, I blame the birders for not reading the email, not the person who wrote it, but I just like this as an example of when a descriptive subject line could have been really helpful. I'll end that story just by saying that a few of us that dropped everything and raced up there found a thick fog bank between us and Hog Island, which only sits about 1,200 feet or 360 meters offshore. It took an hour before the fog cleared and we were able to pick out a tiny red speck on top of the buildings. Overall, listservs were a good system, especially thanks to the centralized organization of them. Each state had their own, and there were several sites that made it easy to find and access each of them. Again, shout out to the American Birding Association, this time with their birding.aba.org webpage that had a nice layout of all the listservs. Or I was always a fan of the digest.cialia.com, where you could read each day's worth of listserv posts for each state or view a whole region at once. This was especially handy for seeing what rarities are showing up in nearby states, so you could get an idea of what you should be on the lookout for. Unfortunately, these sites are kind of broken or are now covered with ads. But it is worth acknowledging that there was some elitism going on with what I'll just call private listservs. These were usually someone starting a group with their friends or some select group, and typically instead of it being automated like a true listserv, they would have people email them sightings and they would decide what they would forward along to their group. Here in Maine, I moderated the public statewide listserv, but there were at least 2 of these private groups, one of which I wasn't included on even after asking. And this is a big problem from the community building aspect of birding, but I'll dive into that more with the problems and hopefully solutions after we talk about some more of the modern rare bird alerts. Listservs were at their prime through the early aughts, but by 2010, and especially with the rise of smartphones and apps, we saw a shift in rare bird alerts. One timestamp I always found interesting is a comment in the Big Year Wikipedia page, which has a nice summary of yearly attempts and efforts. In 2011, John Vanderpool barely missed breaking the ABA Big Year record, but the fascinating note someone added here was Vanderpool's effort was the last made without a major contribution of eBird and birding groups on Facebook, which significantly enhanced the quality and quantity of rare bird alerts. As I've talked about on this channel, eBird has had one of the biggest influences on birding, and their building in of rare bird alerts that work on state and county levels was a brilliant move. Especially the inclusion of needs alerts, which were some of the first kind of personally tailored rare bird alerts, notifying you about both the birds that are rare in the region, but also the species that you specifically haven't seen in that region. And social media, primarily in the form of Facebook groups, have become immensely popular. The ABA Rare Bird Facebook group now has 48,000 members and is often the first place that I learn about rarities outside my region. And there were some early attempts on Twitter, at least back when hashtags were more of a thing, but that never really caught on. Probably for the better based on the general discourse on that app. The current push is towards group messaging apps like GroupMe and WhatsApp. These have definitely taken the place of listservs in most areas and come with the benefit of being much more efficient at getting timely updates out. In Maine, it was when the Stellar Seagull first showed up that we finally made the switch to GroupMe, which people could join and get updates from immediately. These apps are better at pushing notifications too, unlike emails that get messy and don't thread as well. In some areas, especially Canada, there are regional discords being set up. While Discord servers are more popular amongst the gaming community, it offers a lot of features that are useful for birding groups. Not only can channels be set up for rare birds that are in the region, there can also be channels for other topics like what listservs were more broadly for, but in specified areas for talking about equipment, asking questions, or even non-bird sightings about leps and odes. And that's a big downside to the other group messaging apps. They are great for sending timely updates about a rare bird, but can get super annoying when people are starting to get off topic or send superfluous messages. And that's a good segue to talk about these growing problems with rare bird alerts. There are some obvious downsides despite now having more and faster ways to communicate. First of all, it's a bit of a blessing and a curse to have so many options. If you have a special interest, like gulls or nocturnal flight calls, you name it, there's at least a Facebook group for that. Here in Maine, which is a fairly small state, or at least has a smaller birding community than most, I have to follow the state listserv, there's the statewide Rare Bird GroupMe, 2 other county level groups, another county level group over on WhatsApp, another WhatsApp group just for Monhegan Island, our biggest birding hotspot in the state. And then on Facebook, there's the Maine Birds group, a Maine Wildlife group, where lots of birds do get reported, a Maine Rare Bird Alert group, and now weird fringe spin-off groups, and I'm sure something unusual will make it over there eventually. I do worry about these Facebook groups where posts are being shown on an algorithmic feed. Despite being a member and checking Facebook regularly, there's a good chance you may not even see that post at all. And perhaps the biggest problem is just how decentralized all these are. As I mentioned, when the ABA used to keep all the state listservs on one site, you at least had a starting place of where to look for an RBA. But now it's really hard to find any of these. The most common way I see these shared is through existing groups where someone just comments and says, "Anyone got the link for other locations group?" I started adding nearby groups on a separate website where I keep Maine's group rules. I'll link that below, and if anyone wants to add links to other regions in the comments, I'll update the page with those. But I hope we can figure out a better system than this. And all this is especially problematic with the WhatsApp groups that require an admin to add you, rather than being able to request to join directly. And another problem stemming from so many different groups is the lack of uniformity with what the rules are in each group. You can see these group norms break down when a group gets flooded with new users, often when a rare bird is first reported there. In the tech world, this is a known phenomena called the Eternal September. This dates back to the 80s and some of the early internet-based networks of discussion groups called Usenet. These were used by professionals and hobbyists, and as people slowly joined the groups, they'd eventually learn the norms and how to interact without having much impact on the existing users. And this was before the internet was in most households, so the problem would be that each September, when a new wave of students would get on their university's internet and flood these discussion groups, not knowing the rules or norms, and at least for a short time, they would be fairly disruptive in the groups. So then by the 90s, as internet service providers made internet access more affordable and accessible, there was a steady influx of new users in these Usenet groups, again, not knowing the rules, and thus the long-term users said it felt like an eternal September. And this is where having good moderators is so important, another good example of why birding needs gatekeepers. So I guess the question becomes, what is the solution to this? Based on this trend from phone trees to listservs and apps, each getting more efficient and quickly disseminating information, it seems like we need to find a way to focus the source of it better. Back in the winter of 2020, an issue of Living Bird, Cornell's quarterly magazine, came out with an article called Birding with Technology in the Year 2025, Our Predictions. The authors of this are in charge of many of the projects and tools we birders use, and so they would have a good idea of what was coming. Now, we've still got 4 months, at least as I record this, until 2025, but I think some of my biggest wishes, what I wanted to come true from this article, are not on schedule. And I'm certainly not faulting the authors, plus a lot has happened since early 2020, but it is a bit surprising to think about what we are still missing. The biggest miss, at least in the context of this video, was the prediction that by the year 2025, birding could become a social media movement. Birding has become much more popular, especially since the pandemic, as people notice birds in their backyards, and apps like Merlin have made those birds and their sounds, be them properly ID'd or not, much more accessible to new audiences. But this dream that eBird could become a sharing app where birders could coordinate in real time in the field, sharing rare bird alerts when and where birders can make immediate use of them, seems just like that, a faraway dream. We have gotten sans serif fonts, though. I could see the best answer being some model like what British birders have with their aptly named Rare Bird Alert. And here in the US and Canada, we do have NARBA, the North American Rare Bird Alert, but that is really specific to ABA rarities, and I think we need the equivalent of a state-by-state or smaller basis. It is definitely worth noting that what I'm calling these apparently ideal systems are paywalled, requiring at least some subscription, which is going to make their use prohibitive to many people. That said, the ideal solution would be something like that eBird sharing app mentioned in the article, but it's worth noting that that would require a lot of developer time, server usage, and all the wages and fees associated with that. Not to mention that eBird's terms of use for their API explicitly prohibits use for any commercial purposes, so that would prevent anyone from using eBird data in a subscription service anyways, unless it were to come from Cornell themselves. So maybe this future app wouldn't have eBird integrations, but it seems like that would be pretty far from the ideal product and the solution we're looking for. I think our only solution right now is to use what we've got, but let me make the strong recommendation to read all the rules before you join a group so you don't violate any of those norms. Oh, and as a quick tip, there's almost never a need to say thanks in a large group message. Just tap that little heart or something like that. And hey, it isn't 2025 yet. A couple of those predictions did come true already, and maybe there are some more surprises coming. While I started this video with a quote about necessity is the mother of invention, I do want to end it with a line from Mark Kennedy that all of the biggest technological inventions created by man, the airplane, the automobile, the computer, says little about his intelligence but speaks volumes about his laziness. So don't be lazy sitting around waiting for your apps to go off and tell you what birds are being reported. Get out there and find your own. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any more birding content like this. And thanks for watching.